I spent my entire life giving love, time, money, pieces of myself. Until one night, sitting at a table covered with food I had paid for, I heard something that broke me in a way I could never undo. This isn't just a story about humiliation. It's a story about awakening. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, this story is for you. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to hear your story too. I still remember that night vividly. The soft clink of crystal glasses. The low hum of jazz drifting through the house I paid for. The smell of roast chicken I had seasoned that morning, slowly cooking while I ran errands for a dinner I wasn't even meant to attend. I was only there because Olivia had forgotten to mention again that her parents were coming over, and the house needed to look perfect again. I should have left. I should have known better. I should have known the moment her mother looked at me with that familiar mix of curiosity and condescension and asked, "And you are?" Olivia didn't hesitate. "Oh." She laughed like it was the funniest joke in the world. "That's Margaret, our unofficial maid. She keeps the house running." Everyone laughed. Even my son. I stood there holding the empty wine bottle I had carried up from the basement, smiling politely as if the ground hadn't vanished beneath my feet, as if my heart wasn't cracking open piece by piece. I excused myself, placed the bottle on the counter, and walked slowly toward my bedroom while their laughter followed me down the hall. Not one person corrected her. Not even my son. No one said, "That's my mother." That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the door I had painted myself years earlier when we first moved in. I remembered signing the mortgage papers, my name, my credit, my down payment. Ethan had just graduated college then. Olivia wasn't even part of his life yet. They had nothing. I gave them everything. And now I was the maid. The next morning I made coffee like always. Fed the cat Olivia claimed to love. When she came downstairs in her yoga clothes, eyes glued to her phone, I waited. Eventually she looked up. I handed her the keys. All of them. Front door. Back door. Garage. Mailbox. "What's this?" she asked, her perfectly shaped eyebrow creasing. I smiled softly. "Good luck paying the mortgage." She froze. "What?" I walked past her. Past the framed photos I'd chosen, the furniture I'd bought, the walls I'd painted. I took nothing. Just my purse and the coat I wore the day I brought Ethan home from the hospital. I didn't say goodbye. I heard Ethan calling my name as I opened the door. I didn't stop. He ran after me barefoot into the driveway, but I kept walking. I didn't slam the car door. I closed it gently, because something inside me had snapped, but not in anger. Not in grief. It was clarity. And clarity is quiet. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. Simply knows. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew exactly where I wasn't staying. In the rearview mirror, I saw Ethan standing frozen in the driveway. He had no idea how much he'd just lost. Neither did I yet. They say you don't realize you were drowning until you finally breathe. That first night in the small apartment my great-aunt Ruth had left me, it didn't feel like freedom. Not yet. Felt like silence. Heavy, echoing silence that settled over everything like dust. The apartment smelled like time. Old floorboards, yellowed wallpaper, a heater that groaned with age. I dropped my bag on the kitchen table and stood there, unsure whether to cry or laugh. I did neither. I slept on the couch because the bed frame was broken. I ate peanut butter sandwiches and microwaved soup. Days passed and no one called. Not because I had no one, but because no one reached out. Ethan didn't text. Didn't email. Nothing. Maybe Olivia told him not to. Or maybe worse, maybe he just didn't care. I kept replaying that dinner. The laughter. His laughter. I raised that boy alone after his father left. I sacrificed my career, my dreams, myself. I cleaned motel rooms at night and stocked grocery shelves at dawn just to keep us afloat. When my parents passed and left me their insurance money, I used every cent to buy a home. I never asked for rent. Never demanded anything back. And somehow, in Olivia's world, I had become the help. I began writing at night. Old spiral notebooks, the kind I used to buy for Ethan when he was in middle school. I filled them page after page, not for anyone else, just for myself. I wrote the things I had never dared to say out loud. How I used to stand in the kitchen waiting for him to say thank you. How I cried silently in the garage while they went out to dinner without me. How I pretended to be asleep so I wouldn't hear them laughing at my TV shows in the living room I paid for. The words poured out like they had been waiting years to be released. Then one afternoon, while searching for a light bulb in the upstairs storage closet, I found it. The old metal trunk Aunt Ruth used to keep beneath her sewing machine. It was heavy, rusted with age. I pried it open, expecting spools of thread and forgotten buttons. Instead, I found envelopes. Dozens of them. And one in particular changed everything. It was addressed to me in Ruth's familiar handwriting, dated nearly 30 years earlier. If you're reading this, it means you've come back. And I'm sorry you had to. My heart began to race as I unfolded the fragile, yellowed pages. Inside were copies of hospital records, handwritten notes, and a single photograph of a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket. Not Ethan. There was a name beneath the photo. Michael Jameson. I read the letter 3 times before it began to make sense. Ruth had been a nurse at the hospital the night Ethan was born. She wrote that something had never sat right with her. An unexpected room change, confusion with the identification tags, a last-minute switch in the nursery. By the time she questioned it, the babies had already gone home. She never told me. She said she was afraid. She said she hoped she was wrong. But years later, she found something buried in her files. A quiet settlement paid by the hospital to another family. That was when she knew. Ethan wasn't my biological son. My hand shook so badly I thought I might faint. I stared at the photograph, at the name Michael Jameson, my mind refusing to accept it. This was true. Who was Ethan to me? And who was I to him? And then something unexpected happened. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel grief. I felt free. Not because I hadn't loved Ethan, but because suddenly all those years of feeling like a stranger in my own life finally made sense. The distance. The coldness. The way I never quite belonged. Maybe he had always felt it too. Maybe I wasn't imagining things. Maybe I hadn't been crazy after all. I spent the rest of the night going through everything in that trunk. Ruth had saved it all. DNA reports, affidavits, even a small newspaper article about the Jameson family. Successful. Educated. Local. Still living in the same town. My real son had been here all along, just a few miles away. I folded the papers carefully, placed them into a fresh envelope, and slid them into my nightstand drawer. Then I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me, but for the first time in years I wasn't ashamed of her. She was broken, yes, but she was waking up. And the world had no idea what that meant yet. There is a kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. Feels punishing. That was the silence I lived in for weeks after reading Ruth's letter. I didn't know what to do with the truth. I carried it inside me like a live wire. Dangerous to touch, impossible to ignore. I didn't contact Ethan. I didn't search for Michael. I simply existed. Each morning I made a single cup of coffee, stood by the dusty kitchen window, and tried to understand who I was now. The woman who raised Ethan had been a mother, a caregiver, a giver of everything. But who was I without that identity? One cold evening, the heater in the apartment broke. I lit a candle, wrapped myself in blankets, and sat on the couch with the hospital files in my lap. I reread them again and again. Every detail checked out. It was real. Michael Jameson was born the same night as Ethan, in the same hospital wing. A hospital that later paid to keep the truth buried. Ruth had left me the fragments of a life that had been stolen. I grieved, but not for Ethan. I grieved the moments I should have had with Michael. The birthdays. The scraped knees. The science projects. The life I thought I was giving my child but was meant for someone else. And still I didn't hate Ethan. Because my love for him hadn't been biological. It had been unconditional. Or so I believed. But when the person you raise doesn't defend you, doesn't even see you, it forces you to question everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I finally stepped outside myself. I wasn't ready to face Ethan. Not yet. But I could begin somewhere quiet. I walked into town and stopped across the street from a small bookstore on the corner of Main and Elm. Jameson's Books. Deep green paint. Hand-lettered signs on the windows. I had passed it countless times without ever noticing. He was there. Michael. I didn't need confirmation. I knew. He looked about 30, maybe a little older. Clean-cut. reading glasses perched on his nose. He was helping a young woman find a poetry book, his voice calm, patient. His presence gentle, steady. I stood on the sidewalk staring at the sun I never knew I had. And I cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quiet, uncontrollable tears that slipped down my cheeks and soaked into the collar of my coat. I didn't go inside. Not that day. I went back the next day. And the day after that. It became my ritual. I'd sit on the bench nearby, pretending to check my phone or sip coffee from a paper cup, watching Michael live a life I was never part of. A life that had always been closer than I realized. It wasn't stalking. It was mourning and preparation. Because slowly, carefully, I was beginning to connect the dots. As I sat outside the bookstore, I started noticing details. Delivery schedules. Familiar customers. The rhythm of the place. I was watching, yes, but not only Michael. I was watching Ethan and Olivia too. That part was easy. I knew their patterns by heart. Olivia lived online, tagging every brunch cafe, yoga studio, and wine tasting like breadcrumbs scattered across social media. Following the trail took no effort at all. And what I found made my stomach turn. They weren't struggling. They were pretending. Olivia's business, some lifestyle coaching brand, was mostly illusion. Rented office space. Bought followers. Credit cards pushed to their limits just to keep up appearances. And Ethan? He'd quit his job 6 months earlier. Olivia called it manifesting a new chapter. I called it denial. They were balancing on a house of cards, convinced it was solid, unaware that the wind was already shifting. I didn't tell anyone what I discovered. Not yet. Instead, I started a second journal. The first had been filled with grief and release. This one was different. Precise. Calculated. Dates. Names. Business filings. Public records. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was planning. They thought I was gone. Forgotten. Irrelevant. But I had never been more present. And soon I would remind them exactly who I was. The first time I saw Michael up close, I couldn't speak. It was a rainy Thursday. The bookstore was nearly empty. He was restocking the biography section, quietly humming to himself. I lingered too long outside, and when he glanced toward the window, our eyes met. He smiled. Polite. Warm. Nothing more than the kindness you give a stranger. And that's what I was to him. A stranger. My chest tightened. I turned away too quickly, pretending to check my phone, but my hands were shaking. I walked fast, ducked around the corner, barely reaching my car before the tears came. How do you tell someone that their life began with a mistake? How do you look a grown man in the eye and say, "You're not who you think you are. And neither am I"? That night, I pulled out Ruth's letter again and read it, 3 more times. She hadn't just suspected the truth. She had proven it. Michael Jameson wasn't a guess. His name appeared in settlement documents, hospital records, quiet paperwork meant to bury a mistake forever. The hospital never told me because I was never meant to know. And the Jamesons, maybe they didn't know everything. But they knew enough to accept the money and move on. I wasn't there for revenge. I wasn't even sure what I was there for. I just wanted to know him. To see if the ache inside my chest could finally be answered by reality. So I went back. I started small. I bought a book. Michael rang it up himself. Good choice, he said with an easy smile. Hard to find these days. His voice felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. He handed me the bag, our fingers brushing for just a second. You own the shop? I asked. Sort of, he said. My parents helped me get started. They're retired now, so I run things. Of course they helped. Of course he had support. Not like Ethan, who had only ever had my sacrifice and still turned me into a punchline. Michael had parents but not me. Ethan had me and never wanted what I gave. Somewhere the universe had scrambled the pieces and left us all bleeding over the wrong lives. I began visiting the bookstore every few days. Casual. Sometimes I bought something. Sometimes I just browsed. Michael started to recognize me. Back again, he'd say, smiling. We talked about books, weather, local events. I never told him my name. Not yet. Meanwhile, back in the remains of my old life, things were unraveling. Ethan sent one message. Mom, are you okay? That was it. 3 weeks of silence reduced to one sentence. I didn't reply. I started digging deeper instead. The house deed was still in my name. Olivia had tried to refinance without my consent. Denied. She couldn't afford the mortgage. Ethan had no income. I could have evicted them immediately, but that would have been too kind. I wanted them to feel it. The slow panic, the tightening fear, the realization that the ground beneath them didn't belong to them at all. It belonged to me. Every night I wrote. Receipts. Conversations. Legal notes. And also Michael's words. His favorite authors. Small childhood stories. Not as weapons. As understanding. I was learning the son I never got to raise. And somewhere between those pages, a truth became impossible to ignore. Ethan didn't treat me poorly because of a switch at birth. He treated me poorly because he chose to. Because Olivia allowed it. Because respect had slowly eroded into convenience. Michael, on the other hand, didn't know me at all. And yet he showed me more kindness in 5 minutes than Ethan had in 5 years. I wasn't ready to tell him. Not yet. But I was close. And when the moment came, I wouldn't just tell him who I was. I would tell him everything about the hospital, the mistake, the life stolen from us both. First, though, I had to finish watching the collapse of the life I had already walked away from. Because once the last piece fell, I wouldn't look back. I never planned to become a shadow in my own story. But sometimes the only way to truly see people is to step out of the light. After that day in the bookstore, something shifted inside me. Not suddenly, but like sunrise creeping across frozen ground. Quiet. Certain. I wasn't rushing anymore. I wasn't just reaching toward a son I never knew. I was reclaiming myself. I started carrying myself differently. My shoulders straighter. My voice steadier. I bought a second-hand laptop and began transferring my handwritten notes into organized files. Evidence, timelines, names. This was no longer a diary. It was strategy. It was survival. And one truth became impossible to ignore. Ethan and Olivia's world was held together by duct tape and deception. The house they lived in, my house, was still legally mine. Olivia's lifestyle brand, Olivia Ascends, wasn't an empire at all. It was a performance. Fake clients. Manufactured testimonials. Carefully filtered photos selling personal growth. While she drove a leased luxury car she couldn't afford. I checked the LLC filings. Reviewed tax records. Read business reviews. Everything was curated. Every event a photo opportunity. And beneath it all was debt, layers of it. Maxed out credit cards. A defaulted private loan. Ethan's student debt untouched. They were drowning but too proud or too arrogant to admit it. That's when I knew. If I pulled even one loose thread, everything would unravel. But I didn't pull it yet. There was one more step I needed to take. Michael. I kept visiting the bookstore. He still didn't know who I was, but each conversation softened the fear. We talked about books, television, city noise, good coffee. Once, at the cafe next door, he told me how he nearly became a teacher before his love of books led him to business. You remind me of someone, he said once, stirring his tea. Someone I can't quite place. I smiled. Maybe a librarian. He laughed. Maybe. That moment stayed with me for days. I didn't just like him. I recognized him. Not because of documents or photographs, but because of the way he listened. The way he treated people. The quiet steadiness in him. Felt familiar. Felt like mine. I began imagining a life I never had, the one where I raised him. Baking cookies. Sitting through soccer games. Cheering from the sidelines. The images were so vivid they made my chest ache. But I couldn't live in the past. So I planned the future. The first call I made was to a lawyer. Not for revenge, for justice. I wanted the house sold. Legally, it was mine. I had made the down payment. Paid every bill. Never signed it over. Ethan had always said, "We'll put it in your name later." There had never been any rush for him. I met an attorney downtown, a woman my age, sharp, calm, direct. She listened without judgment. When I finished, she nodded once. "We'll file the motion this week." I signed the papers without hesitation. That evening I walked past the house. The porch light was on. Olivia sat on the swing, wine glass in hand, scrolling through her phone. Inside, Ethan lounged on the couch playing video games. Their lives were on autopilot. completely unaware that the ground beneath them was already shifting. This wasn't about punishment. It was about balance. When the house sold, they would finally feel what I had lived with for years: the vulnerability, the helplessness, the shock of being disposable. I didn't slam doors. I didn't shout. I watched. I waited. I walked away. The first domino had fallen, and they didn't even know it yet. I've always believed silence carries more weight than noise. True strength isn't how loudly you fight. It's how deeply you know you're right. The day the official notice went out, I was sitting in a cafe near the courthouse, stirring honey into my tea with a calm I hadn't felt in years. My phone buzzed. Ethan. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Then I turned the phone face down and let the silence speak. It wasn't that I didn't want to hear his voice. I just wasn't ready to hear him lie. Later that afternoon, his email arrived. "Mom, what are you doing? Please call me. Olivia is freaking out." Of course she was. The mortgage was due. Refinancing was impossible. And the person they had dismissed as weak, the woman they underestimated, was the one holding the deed. A week later, Olivia called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail tightly controlled. "Margaret, we really need to talk. This is just a misunderstanding. Ethan says you're going through something and we want to support you. But you're putting our lives at risk. That's not fair." I listened to it twice. She called the house hers. My silence sharpened. 2 days later, Ethan came to my apartment. I saw him through the peephole before he knocked. Uncombed hair, dark circles, a man coming apart. I didn't open the door. He knocked once. Then again. "Mom, please don't do this." I stood on the other side, my hand resting on the knob, and said nothing. I let him feel what it was like to be unheard. The following week, my lawyer finalized the listing. The house would sell. I would receive every dollar. And for the first time in a very long time, something felt complete. Every cent, legally, ethically, emotionally, belonged to me. Olivia tried to fight it. She claimed she had contributed value. My lawyer smiled and said, "Let her prove that in court." She couldn't. Because Olivia had never invested in anything real, only appearances. And those were collapsing now, one filter at a time. Word spread quickly. Her parents stopped commenting on her posts. Clients quietly backed out. She uploaded a video ranting about the unfairness of generational property laws, but people saw through it. I didn't post anything at all. Instead, I kept going to Michael's bookstore. We had coffee again. Talked about an old novel we both loved. He recommended a memoir. "It's about grief," he said, "but also forgiveness." I nodded, swallowing the tightness in my throat. "I think you'd like it," he added. "Maybe," I said softly, "but not yet." I wasn't finished grieving. And I certainly wasn't finished forgiving. At home, I began packing away old photographs. Ethan as a baby, school portraits, birthday parties where I did all the work and received none of the credit. I didn't destroy them. I simply stored them away. Because the woman who had spent her life giving everything was gone. The woman who replaced her wasn't angry. She was awake. The papers were signed. The house was going on the market. And somewhere inside that green bookstore across town, my real son laughed at something a customer said, completely unaware that his life was about to change too. But in a good way. Because not all losses are tragedies. Some are beginnings. Wearing unfamiliar clothes. I used to think masks were only worn at costume parties. Olivia wore hers like skin, polished, smiling, untouchable. She always knew how to pose, how to soften her voice in public. But masks crack. And I was about to shatter hers completely. The idea came to me one morning while browsing the local business directory. I already had enough surface-level dirt, credit issues, fake partnerships, missed payments. But I wanted facts. Something solid. Something that couldn't be explained away. So I hired a local business consultant, Darren. Quiet. Precise. Discreet. I asked for a full audit. Nothing illegal. Just a deep look at the structure of a company. I gave him the name. Olivia Ascends LLC. A week later, he handed me a neatly organized folder. What he found stunned even me. No tax filings for 2 quarters. Forged invoices linked to clients who didn't exist. Photo shoots staged in rented homes she claimed were renovations. Partnerships that were nothing more than affiliate links padded with false metrics. She wasn't exaggerating her success. She was manufacturing it. Would this hold up? I asked. Darren met my eyes. If this goes public, she's finished. Financially. Professionally. That's when I made my choice. I printed everything. Then I found the address of Olivia's parents, the same people who once laughed in my home, wine glasses clinking while their daughter humiliated me in my own kitchen. I mailed the file anonymously. No letter. No name. Just a note on top. Everything you think you know is a performance. 2 days later, the cracks appeared. Olivia's Instagram went silent. No stories. No morning routines. Her latest post, an inspirational quote about being misunderstood, filled with strange, questioning comments. Then the dominoes fell. Her website went under maintenance. Her next workshop was canceled. And then came the final detail, shared by a neighbor who still followed her. Olivia's mother storming out of her house, shouting into her phone, face flushed, purse swinging wildly. Whatever happened behind those doors wasn't filtered. And it wasn't gentle. That night Ethan called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. Mom, I don't know what's happening. Olivia's parents aren't speaking to us. Someone sent them documents. They think we forged them. Did you do this? I didn't respond. He was finally seeing her clearly. And maybe himself too. He had defended a woman who dismantled everything she touched, starting with me. Let him sit with that truth. Later that evening I walked to the bookstore again. Michael was closing up. He waved when he saw me. Back again, he said, unlocking the door. You should just work here at this point. Maybe I should, I smiled. We sat on the floor surrounded by stacks of books. He was cataloging a new shipment. I helped without being asked. After a while he looked at me. Why do you come here? The question caught me off guard. I really looked at him then. He had my eyes. I hadn't noticed before. I like how it feels in here, I said. Like nothing's pretending to be something it's not. He tilted his head, thoughtful. Me too. We worked in silence after that. No small talk. No questions. But something settled between us. Not the truth, not yet, but something close. A thread. A recognition. And for the first time in a very long while, I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's life. I felt seen. The woman who once stood invisible in her own kitchen was gone. In her place stood someone they never anticipated. Someone they should never have underestimated. I used to believe heartbreak arrived all at once, like a crash or a door slamming shut. But that isn't how it always comes. Sometimes it seeps in slowly, like water leaking through a ceiling, drip by drip, until one day the entire roof collapses. By then, Ethan was standing directly beneath it. The house was officially listed. Olivia's carefully constructed image had fallen apart. Her business exposed. Her reputation unraveling. And with nowhere left to place the blame, Ethan did what he had always done. He came running to me. It was a quiet afternoon. I was finishing a cup of tea when I heard the knock, 3 soft taps, hesitant, unsure. The sound of someone who didn't know whether they'd be welcomed or shut out. I opened the door slowly. He looked exhausted. Unshaven. Thinner than I remembered. His shirt wrinkled as if he'd pulled it off the floor. Mom, he said, his voice cracking. Can I come in? I didn't answer. I simply stepped aside. He entered and stood in the center of the room, unsure of where to put himself. For a long moment we said nothing. Then he spoke. Why are you doing this? To us. I almost laughed. Us. I repeated quietly, as if that word still belonged to us. I sat across from him, calm, steady. I'm not doing anything to you, Ethan, I said. I'm finally doing something for myself. His jaw tightened. You're selling the house. My house. I grew up there. You just gave it away. My house, I corrected gently. The one I paid for. And the one where you let your wife turn me into a joke. You watched it happen. You laughed. And you never apologized. He didn't argue. He just stared at the floor. I thought you were being dramatic, he muttered. I didn't know it hurt you that much. I looked at him for a long moment. That's the problem, I said. You never tried to know what hurt me. You just assumed I'd always be there. Cleaning, paying, nodding along while someone chipped away at who I was. He flinched. Olivia isn't who I thought she was. That's not news to me. He finally looked up. His eyes were glassy. I lost everything. I didn't blink. No, I said quietly. You gave it away. Silence stretched between us. I miss you, he whispered. I raised you, I replied. Fed you. Clothed you. Sacrificed for you. And you let me be humiliated in the home I built. His lip trembled. I thought she was helping me. I thought we were building something. You built a lie, I said. And now it's collapsing. He stood, pacing the room. So that's it, he asked. You just walk away? I went to the kitchen drawer and pulled out the envelope Ruth had left me. I need to tell you something, I said. And I need you to listen. He nodded, confused. I handed him the envelope. These are your birth records. He sat down and opened it slowly. His brow creased as he read. Then his face drained of color. This can't be real. It is. You're saying I'm not your son? I'm saying you weren't born to me, I said. But I raised you as if you were. I gave you everything I had. Even when you didn't want it. He went pale. Then who is your real son? I didn't answer. He sat there, stunned, papers shaking in his hands. I don't know who I am anymore, he whispered. Now you know how I felt, I said. Something broke in him then. Not loudly. Not violently. Just quietly. And I felt no anger. No satisfaction. Only peace. Because I had finally spoken the truth. I walked him to the door. Can we fix this? He asked, his eyes pleading. I don't know, I said honestly. But it's not my responsibility to try anymore. And I closed the door. Not in anger, but with finality. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one holding it open. It took me 3 days to decide how to tell Michael. I practiced the words everywhere. In the mirror, in the car, standing in line at the grocery store with oranges in my basket, whispering sentences I couldn't finish. I'm your mother. There was a mistake. We've both been living lives that weren't meant to be ours. Nothing sounded right. Because how do you hand someone a truth like that and expect them to survive it? Still, I had to try. Michael was in the bookstore like always. Sunlight poured through the windows, casting golden lines across the shelves and wooden floor. It felt like a sacred space, somewhere truth belonged. When he smiled at me, I almost turned around. But I didn't. You came at the perfect time, he said. We just got a shipment of rare poetry editions. I swallowed hard. Actually, I said, I came to talk. He studied my face, sensing the weight in my voice. Okay, he said gently. Come with me. He led me into a small break room. An old kettle, a chipped table, a mismatched couch. Real. Unpolished. We sat. I've been coming here for a reason. I began, twisting my hands together. I figured, he said softly. You're not really here for the books. I gave a sad smile. No, I'm not. I took out the envelope, Ruth's letter, the records, the proof, and placed it between us. What's that? He asked carefully. Something that's going to change everything. He looked at me, waiting. 30 years ago. I began, my voice breaking. There was a mistake at the hospital. 2 newborns were switched. His brow tightened, confusion spreading across his face. My son, I said carefully, was sent home with another family, and their baby was given to me. He didn't move, didn't speak. I raised him, I continued, loved him with everything I had, but he never truly loved me back. His eyes searched mine, slowly assembling the truth I hadn't spoken aloud. You think I know you are. He looked down at the envelope, then lifted it with unsteady hands. Inside were the records, the timeline, the explanation. Ruth's letter, quiet, careful, undeniable. He read in silence. Every second stretched thin. When he finished, he didn't look up right away. He set the papers down, his fingers still resting on them, as if he needed something solid to hold. This is a lot, he finally said. I know. And you're Margaret? Yes. He met my eyes, glassy and unsure. I don't feel anything, he said. Not yet. You don't have to, I replied. I'm not here to ask for a place in your life. I just needed you to know. The truth needed to exist. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. I have parents, he said. They raised me. They love me. I know, I said gently. And I would never ask you to stop loving them. We sat in that small room surrounded by books, the air scented with old paper and peppermint tea. And for the first time in years I felt something loosen inside me. Not joy. Not closure. Relief. The kind that comes from no longer carrying something alone. After a while he stood and paced the room. I don't know what to do with this, he admitted. I don't either, I said. But I don't hate you. Tears blurred my vision. That's more than I expected. He faced me again. You didn't have to come, he said. But you did. I didn't know how not to, I answered. He nodded, understanding settling quietly between us. Can we take it slow? He asked. I don't want to force this into something it isn't. I wouldn't ask for anything else. He offered a small fragile smile. Will you stay for tea? I'd love to. That afternoon we didn't speak about the files again. We talked about books, about the weather, about how he hated the sound of wind chimes but loved the rain. The past stayed between us, unopened, raw, but something had begun. Not a relationship. Not yet. But a beginning. By autumn, more than the leaves were changing. The house sold faster than I expected. Full price. More than I'd imagined. Ethan and Olivia were given 30 days to leave. No extensions. No negotiations. I didn't make that decision out of anger. I made it because that house had been my prison. Watching them pack their carefully curated life box by box felt like watching a stage set being dismantled. Every pillow, every plant, every designer detail bought on borrowed time. The play was over. On moving day I drove past once. I didn't stop. Olivia stood barking orders at the movers, sunglasses hiding whatever pride she had left. Ethan paced the lawn, phone pressed to his ear. I wondered if he ever imagined this ending. If he ever realized I would be the one to bring it. Their downfall wasn't loud. There were no public scandals, no headlines. But it was complete. Olivia's parents withdrew their support. Her business lost its sponsors. Her once polished brand became something people whispered about. The woman who had mocked me in my own kitchen could no longer afford her luxury routines. Ethan searched for work. Any work. With no degree, no references, and years unaccounted for, doors stayed closed. He moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. I learned this from my lawyer. I didn't ask. And I didn't celebrate. Because this was never about revenge. It was about truth. And consequences. My life, meanwhile, was quietly becoming something new. Michael and I kept meeting, coffee, book talks, shared articles, small observations about the world. Once he asked about my writing. I told him I'd started a memoir. That I had a story even if it was never published. You should write it, he said. Stories like that matter. He never called me mom. I never expected him to. That wasn't the point. What we were building came from choice, not obligation. And that changed everything. One afternoon at the farmer's market, he picked up a jar of apple butter and laughed. My mom used to make this every fall. The way he said my mom didn't hurt felt right. Because he had a mother who raised him. And I had a son who saw me too late. Some evenings I sat alone with my tea, wondering if Ethan slept on a mattress or the floor. If Olivia still wore her silk robes. If they finally saw what they had ignored for so long. I didn't miss them. I missed the life I thought we were meant to have. But grief like that fades slowly. And pride grows in its place. Especially when you learn to love yourself more than you ever loved their approval. Before the sale closed, I walked through the old neighborhood one last time. Not to linger. Not to haunt it. Just to say goodbye. I drove past Ethan's old school. The park where I used to push him on the swings. The grocery store where I clipped coupons just to afford his favorite cereal. And I let it all go. Because I had given everything I had to a family that never gave anything back. And now I was giving my time to someone who might never call me mom, but who looked at me with kindness, with curiosity, with respect. Sometimes you don't need redemption. You just need peace. And for the first time I was beginning to feel it. It was early November when Ethan texted me. Just one line. Can we meet? Just once. I stared at the screen for a long time. It had been weeks since I'd seen him. Weeks of silence, heavier than any argument we'd ever had. But the message wasn't angry. It wasn't desperate. It sounded like surrender. We met at a small park on the edge of town. Rusted benches. A looping trail around a dried-up pond. I chose it because it held no memories. No ghosts. He was already there, sitting with his hands clasped between his knees. When he looked up, I saw the boy he used to be. Awkward, unsure, waiting for direction. I sat beside him, leaving space. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said. I nodded. I want to understand." I reached into my bag and took out the manila envelope. Ruth's letter. The hospital records. The DNA results. I handed it to him without speaking. He didn't open it. "I did my own test," he said quietly. "Same result." I nodded again. I kept asking myself, if I wasn't your son, then what was I? I looked at him, really looked at him, and said softly, "You were my child. And I treated you the way I knew how." He winced. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said quickly. "I don't deserve it." "You don't," I replied calmly. "But that doesn't mean I hate you." He turned toward me, eyes wet. "Then what does it mean?" "It means I finally love myself more than I love the idea of you." The silence that followed was thick, heavy with truth. "I thought I was protecting Olivia," he said finally. "Standing by her. But really I was hiding behind her." "You handed her the pen," I said, "and let her rewrite the story." He nodded slowly. "I wish I could undo it." "You can't." We sat there in the cold November air, two people who had built a life on a lie, carefully pulling it apart. Then he surprised me. "I hope he's good to you." I looked at him, startled. "Michael," he clarified. "Your son." My breath caught. "He's kind," I said. "Gentle." He smiled faintly. "I guess some of that came from you." We laughed, soft, tired laughter. Not joyful. Not bitter. "I don't want to be in your life if it hurts you," he said. "But if there's ever even a small place for me." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I stood and looked out at the pond. Leaves floated across the surface like ashes. "I'll think about it," I said. He nodded. "That's more than I hoped for." As I left, I placed my hand on his shoulder, just for a second. And that was it. Not closure. Understanding. And that, I realized, was enough. I didn't need to fix him anymore. And I didn't need to be fixed. I just needed to be free. And I was. I always thought freedom was too big a word. Something meant for speeches and flags, not for someone like me. But the morning I turned the key in Michael's bookstore, I finally understood it. He had called the night before, said he wanted to show me something. His voice was casual, but there was weight beneath it. When I walked in, he stood near the back wall. A new wooden sign hung above an arched doorway. "The next chapter." "What's this?" I asked. He handed me a small brass key. "I'm opening a new section," he said. "A reading space. Coffee. Community talks." I wanted to feel like belonging. I turned the key over in my hand. "And you want me to open it?" "I want you to have it." I stared at him. "You gave someone your whole life," he continued softly. "They treated you like background, like furniture. But I see you. You don't have to prove anything to me." Tears burned my eyes. "You don't have to do this," I whispered. "I know," he said. "But I want to." I stepped beneath the sign and slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. Inside, warm light spilled through tall windows. Shelves lined the walls, classics, memoirs. A rug in the center. A worn armchair. A small table set for tea. It felt like a room from a dream I'd forgotten I once had. I turned back to him, undone. "Consider it yours," he said. "For as long as you want." I stood in the center of the room, breathing in the scent of wood, paper, and possibility. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was beginning. That night, I sat in the apartment one last time. The old notebook rested on my lap, its final page still untouched. I wrote, "I was a woman who gave until I disappeared. Then I became a woman who took herself back. Not with anger, not with destruction, but with silence, with truth, and with a strength they never saw coming." The next morning, I finalized the donation. A portion of the house sale went directly to a foundation that supports women starting over. Women who have been dismissed, discarded, and underestimated. Women like me. They called to thank me. But I didn't need gratitude, because every time I stepped into that bookstore, into the next chapter, I remembered exactly who I was now. Not Ethan's mother. Not Olivia's servant. Margaret Walker. A woman. A survivor. The author of her own ending. I never needed permission to begin again. I only needed a key. And this time it didn't open someone else's door. It opened mine. Thank you for listening. If this story spoke to you, subscribe and share your own story in the comments. Your voice matters.